We are moving on to our next session right now. It is my great pleasure to introduce Deepti Desai. Deepti is a board member at the IIT Alumni Association of the Bay Area. She is also the CEO of Care One. She is deeply committed to promoting interests in healthcare. And today she will be introducing the next panel discussion. Welcome, Deepti. Please join me in giving her a warm welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Paula and the team for bringing Amit Zaveri in as a keynote speaker. Such a powerful keynote. And as we saw, many of you know him from his Oracle days. And then he and TK and the whole team moved en masse to Google. And they did some phenomenal work at Google, Google Cloud. And then now he is at ServiceNow. And we look forward to seeing some great achievements daily from him and his team. So now that your brains are all warmed up, I hope, we're really looking forward to our next amazing speaker, a trailblazer, a thought leader, a speaker, an author. He's also an inventor, an investor, father, husband, and a CEO, of course, of General Catalyst. Hemant Taneja, it's a pleasure to have you here as our next keynote speaker. But I'd like to say a few things about Hemant that you may not know. I know that many of you are IITians here, and you may have maybe 1 or 2 or 3 degrees, as is true for many here. But Hemant Taneja doesn't have 1 or 2 or 3 degrees. He has 5 degrees under his belt. He has a BS in biology, mathematics, electrical engineering, computer science. He has a master's in electrical engineering, computer science, and a master's in operations research from MIT. So, I mean, I think he's in the right place today amongst all these overachieving IITians over here. So it's a big welcome. But that's not enough. Hemant is also an author. He has authored 4 books. He is the author of a couple of healthcare books. One is Unscaled. Another one is Unhealthcare, healthcare assurance. You all know that healthcare is broken, and there's a lot of attempts being made to fix it. If you are involved in healthcare, it's a must-read book. It tells you how we can all collectively work together to make healthcare better again. He's also written another book called The Intended Consequences. It talks about building market-leading companies. And his latest book was just released this week. It talks about the transformation principles, which is a blueprint on how to create enduring change. So I've pre-ordered mine, and I'm looking forward to getting his autograph and his signature on it. I know some of you have purchased it, and he'll be happy to sign it over there, too. In addition, and this is most important, he's a terrific investor as CEO of General Catalyst. And General Catalyst is not just a VC company, it's a global investment and transformation company. He has helped create more than, I think, 10 unicorns. I lose count. Many of you must have heard about Livongo, a $18.5 billion acquisition by Teladoc. He's also early invested in Grammarly, GitLab, Glean, Gusto, also Stripe, Snap, Samsara, Crescendo, Commure, Canva. And I think Commure is a $6 billion valuation, and today his session will be moderated by the COO of Commure, Deepika, and I'll talk about her too. So I have to say, I could go on and on about Hemant, but he's really been recognized multiple times on the Midas list that comes out by Forbes, and he's rapidly moving up that ladder in the Midas list, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him #1 over there one day. He's really an advocate for responsible innovation, and he aligns innovation with long-term interests of society, and you'll hear some of that today from him. But surprisingly, and this surprises me the most, is that he is well-balanced individual. In addition to doing all of these things, he's also a husband, a father of 3 kids, and he spends a lot of time with them. So it's really good to see that too, because sometimes we get so focused in all the stuff that we do that we tend to not balance our life, which is true for many of us over here. So I would like to also take some time to introduce Deepika, who's going to be moderating this session. Deepika is a graduate of Stanford. She was working in the Stanford imaging and diagnostic lab over there as a research scientist in molecular imaging over there. And since then, she became the co-founder of Commure along with Taneja. And both of them are now leading Commure. She is the CEO, Taneja is the CEO. And she has helped Commure grow and acquire investments up to $750 million from big investors, including General Catalyst and Y Combinator, et cetera. So she'll be moderating, and I would like to get all of you to give both Deepika and Hemant a big round of applause as they come up and talk to us about the transformation principles. You have your mic, and you're mic'd up. Great. Thank you.
All right. No one should ever be introduced after Hemant. That's what I've learned. All right, everyone. Hemant, obviously, founder, CEO, builds companies, invests in companies. But on top of that, like Deepti mentioned, has just published his new book. You have enough going on. Why did you decide to do the book? Why now?
Yeah, first of all, it's good to be with everybody, and that's the longest introduction I've ever gotten, so that was a little embarrassing. I would say, all the books I've written, I've usually done it in the context of what the priorities are over the next 2 to 3 years that I'm focused on. It's a way to create a prepared mind. If I can take you all back to November 22, when ChatGPT was launched, it's sort of an interesting technology where it hit the zeitgeist instantaneously, right? Every CEO in every industry, in every country, was thinking about, what do I do with this technology? And the other thing we know about AI, and we've been investing in AI even before that, older versions of AI, pre-transformers. And the reality is that it's a transformative technology. The impact is only around companies that have data and customers and have scale. And so it becomes very clear when you put those two ideas together to say, the world is going to rapidly change. You're going to diffuse this technology into society in a material way. And that has all kinds of implications, right? And technology, I'm not a sort of naysayer on technology. My view is technology is always neutral. And if you have intentionality, you can do a lot of good in the world. And if you're not careful, you can create a lot of unintended consequences. So the idea of writing the book was to take a step back and say, okay, we have this incredible leverage point with AI, and take a step back and think about what's happening in the world. So if you look at the last 5-7 years, we had a pandemic, which essentially eviscerated a lot of our healthcare system. This is where Deepika and I are very focused on how do you really transform healthcare. We have had wars. So defense and peace, which is sort of a precursor to capitalism being productive, is really getting challenged everywhere in the world. As part of the wars, if you remember, we kicked Russia out of SWIFT. So everybody in the world started thinking, well, is this global financial infrastructure in a global market, or is it an American financial infrastructure? And with the US-China dynamics, all the supply chains are shifting, if you think about it. So every aspect, you take financial services, energy, defense, supply chains, countries are starting to think about, how do we do what's best for our people? How do we really drive resilience for our people if there's a next pandemic, or as war is shifting, or supply chains and jobs? So you put those two together and you say, oh boy, the next 15 to 20 years, it's an incredibly complex time. I often say it's peak ambiguity. And it's also a place where if we all work together with a lot of intentionality, we can actually set these industries up in an enduring way for the next 100 years, in a way that they're inclusive and sustainable. So the key thing, however, is, and the previous conversation gave some good insight into this as well. We're actually in peak ambiguity. We don't really know how these companies are going to end up. We don't really know which companies are going to, in the end, capture value or not. We don't really know what the unintended consequences could be if we're not careful about how you use AI. And so what do you have in peak ambiguity when you have this tremendous task of transforming all the key industries as entrepreneurs, because I do believe it's going to be done with this next generation? It's your values, it's your principles. So I sort of took the time to say, let's get thoughtful about what are those principles that you can lean on as we build this next set of companies. So that was the reason for it, and sort of gives you a prepared mind. And I tried to draw on what companies, including Commure, are doing around this transformation, what we're doing sort of in the transformation of the healthcare and broadly the investment industry, and sort of draw on a lot of the learnings to share some anecdotes there.
So one of the principles in your book talks about how companies need to rediscover what their soul is, right? Like, what do you stand for? What are these values? These are all very human ideas, right? And now with AI, there's more and more automation entering organizations. You take healthcare, for example, right? It is one of the most human experiences that we go through. You are very terminally ill. You go to a doctor, not only for care, but for compassion, et cetera. And now there's more and more automation, which is needed, right? Like, it's an unsustainable system right now. We're paying exorbitant amounts of money. We need that automation. How do we reconcile, finding our soul and these human elements and more and more and more automation, which by definition means less people?
Yeah, this is actually a good room to be talking about the soul in. So, I went to a Vedic school in India, and we should talk a lot about this. And the reality is, the key thing to me about a business with a soul is it outlasts the founders. And it's because souls endure, bodies don't. And so the whole idea is, how do you think really, really long term? And how do you think about these reincarnations across different chapters of a company that can make a difference in society? So if you want to build something that's going to outlast you and be very, very long term, you have to think with that mindset. So I think that was sort of the point there. And if we bring it back to healthcare, and I said, we all know healthcare is broken. We all know there's lots of issues. We all know the misalignment comes from the fact that the system makes money when we're sick versus when we're healthy. So it actually wants you to be sick. It's a misaligned system. So if I said, all of us, we close our eyes and said, what should the system look like in 40 years? If we brought it from a blank sheet of paper, you would say, it focuses on keeping us healthy, it's affordable, and it's accessible to everybody. And none of those things are true today, right? It focuses on monetizing our sickness. It's not affordable. It's bankrupting all of society. More than 50% of budgets in any state, if you talk to any governor, healthcare is the biggest issue. In the next election, healthcare is going to be the biggest issue because it's just not affordable. And it's not accessible. We don't have enough care to take care of people in our inner cities. We don't have a workforce for that, the empathy that you're talking about. And we don't have the infrastructure to support people in rural America, where all these capabilities have been eviscerated because there's not enough density, and so you can't really build resilient infrastructure. So there's like significant challenges. And so the question is, how do you think about using technology to go transform? And that requires you to think about it on a much, much longer horizon than, hey, can I build a company that has certain scale, goes public, and I can go exit? You really have to be soulful about, hey, we want to make a difference in society. We want to create a business that aligns profit and purpose and is actually focusing on delivering care for everybody, all the way from kids, and there's a lot of mental health issues that kids deal with, to the elderly, where we don't have an elderly care workforce. We can't afford it. For about 50% of all healthcare costs is in the last 6 months of our lives, just the way the system is set up, going back to the sick care alignment. And how do we reorient the system so it's much more empathetic and you actually die with dignity? I mean, one thing I think a lot about in healthcare is America's obsessed with fighting death. And the other part of sort of being soulful is you actually embrace it. It's like, okay, there is the next chapter and you want to die with dignity. And like, can the healthcare system actually deliver that? And in doing so, creates a better experience in end of life and makes it more affordable for society. So I think there are these larger things, and there's a version of this in other industries as well, that you have to think about in how you architect your overall systems, and then the set of companies that drive that transformation inside of them.
How do your book draws upon a couple decades of your work in tech. How have you applied some of those transformation principles and, trying to make that organization that endures beyond you to General Catalyst?
Yeah, so you know what, maybe I make it concrete and talk about the work that we're doing in that regard. So if you think about in healthcare, it was mentioned earlier that I built this company called Livongo. The key thing I was really proud of in that business, because we started this in our offices, was that we created a consumer NPS that was better than Apple's in healthcare. That doesn't happen, right? So it was like a NPS of over 70, and we built an experience that consumers just really loved. So we figured out, okay, we know how to create these experiences. Now, how do we go transform the system? And then when COVID happened, at that time, we'd already started Commure a few years before that, and it was entirely in service of how do we make health systems more successful? And COVID was a flashpoint. It was a flashpoint because all the insurance companies, their balance sheets were growing because no one was actually getting their procedures done, but we were all paying subscriptions for our health insurance. And hospitals were looking for bailouts because no one was coming in to get procedures done, so there was no revenue. It sort of shows the misalignment there. So we decided to lean in, and we said, let's go transform the system. And in order to really transform it, we have to make health systems successful, right? And that's the work that we're very focused on. And in order to do that, the key conclusion there was that you needed to deeply partner with these health systems, okay? And so one of the very first health systems we partnered with was HCA, which is the largest. And it's also the most profitable, so it actually tries to align taking care of people as well as being profitable. And there's a lot of learnings from there. And so the whole idea was, and I would always say to these CEOs, we bring ignorance and imagination, and we're techies. Tell us the problems, we'll co-create solutions. And so we built a lot of that trust with this industry, and we said, we will work sort of focus on your success. Then, if you think about what happened 2 years later, was ChatGPT happened, as I mentioned. So COVID was 2020s, really it sort of took off. 2022, ChatGPT happened. We went back to the same systems and said, how do we help you really bring this technology to life in a productive way? We ended up partnering with HCA. This is the work that Deepika and her team did. And we actually designed a set of solutions that bring efficiency from a scribing perspective for all these care teams. And the core insight there, by the way, when we started doing this, I didn't think the healthcare industry would be the first to apply or adopt AI. People's lives, very conservative. But the reality was, in hindsight, that workforce was incredibly burnt out, right? And so they, instead of worrying about what's going to happen to our jobs in the future, they said, give us the leverage today. So Deepika and team go in. We work hand in hand with the HCA team, which is the largest health system in the country, 2,400 facilities. And we launched this AI solution. I think you should talk about sort of how that's making a difference. And all the emails we get from physicians crying, just how much we have sort of taken burden off of them. That collaboration and sort of thinking in service of these companies and what these workforces need, that's what it's going to take to drive the transformation. Maybe just talk about that a little bit of some of the learnings there.
I mean, it's pretty amazing. Like doctors, 4-5 hours a day of documentation time is removed. So you essentially are giving them back 20 hours a week. Health systems, HCA, like you said, extremely operationally rigorous. As a result of this documentation automation that they're getting, to each hospital, they're adding about a couple percentage points of margin based on the free cash flow that we are giving them, based on coding upgrades and making sure that denials are going down and documenting things so that there's less of a prior authorization needed. Basically, less hands need to touch every bill that goes to an insurance company, just because you have something listening to you in the background of your doctor's appointment, let alone the fact that you can now look at your patient in the eye and talk to them for the entire appointment instead of sitting behind an iPad. So I completely believe this concept of transforming these human experiences with AI. I'm super bullish on it. We see a lot of digital automation, right? AI is really taking over the digital landscape. There's some really interesting stuff happening on the physical side of things, but everyone is saying it's a little bit further, right? what are you seeing there? How should we think about pacing when it comes to physical AI?
Yeah. So actually, before we go to physical, let me back up. So one of the places where we are focused is on the white-collar jobs. So if you think about where does AI really make a sense, and how are we going to justify the hundreds of billions of dollars these hyperscalers and the AI labs are actually investing, it's not going to be because they go capture the IT spend or the cloud spend. It's actually because of labor spend. And so what we did when ChatGPT happened, also from an opportunity perspective, was we said, okay, in every department of a company, what is an AI native way to run it? You obviously see that with Cloud Code and some of the tools like Cognition and Cursor and others. In coding, there's a version of that in call centers, there's a version of that in legal, there's a version of that in HR, all departments, that's being done. Our belief was, and you were listening to Amit before, the diffusion of enterprise AI is actually a complicated task because you have to have 4 things that happen. First is you need the data infrastructure readiness, you need the models adapted to your industry, and then you need the workforce transformation because you're going to have agentic workforce and a human workforce. Some agents are going to manage humans, some humans are going to manage agents. So what does an organization really look like? And the fourth is, what is the courage of the leadership at the top to actually drive that change? And so our core belief was that the places where that's going to happen first is everywhere we outsourced for labor arbitrage, we're going to onshore for AI productivity. So look at a lot of the IT services opportunity in India. I think that gets to be at risk because you can replace a lot of those types of jobs with AI. So that's happening. So that to me is, when you look at the opportunity around software AI models, that's what it is. Physical AI, I think, is a much more complicated problem than people realize because you don't have you're going to build a ChatGPT and put it on the cloud that's already ubiquitous, and it's going to diffuse through society in like no time. Going back to my November 2022 point. Robotics, you don't have a supply chain like that. You don't have hardware APIs. You don't have companies that actually are really global and can actually bring these solutions in fast. So there's a lot of model work being done, but I think it's going to be 10 plus years before you feel like the same momentum that we feel today. Now, maybe something, I used to say that before the iPhone happened in mobile, and maybe there's some technological innovation that's going to come about that radically changes it, but I don't see that in the industry today. Until that happens and there's an acceleration path, I think physical AI is going to be slower. Now, it manifests in companies like Samsara and some of the hardware solutions in healthcare and whatnot, but those to me are easy, simple problems. A lot of the physical AI is going to be about how do you really rethink manufacturing and supply chains at scale. That's a much more complicated problem.
And when you think about using AI as this transformational software, there are certain opportunities that more legacy, well-funded, massive behemoths are better situated to take on, and then there's opportunities that startups are uniquely positioned to take on. How do you see that splitting up?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think so. The model layer is hard because I think to think about starting another lab and aggregating the capital becomes really hard. I do think building sort of industry models on top, like a lot of the work that we're doing at Commure, which has regard for the regulation and is built in collaboration with the industry, and there's trust. In critical industries, that will have a place to build a great business that's a great outcome in terms of what venture capital funds versus these horizontal sort of models. So I do think that's an interesting opportunity. I think these service ideas of transforming services is interesting, but not necessarily a straight shot like what we used to do before. So before, in the cloud era, the whole idea was create an MVP, be a hacker, create an MVP, get traction, and put capital on it to really scale. And then you'll build your second act and go from there. I don't think in the AI world that's really the way it happens. You need to have a much more iterative mindset. You may start and get some initial success with customers, but then maybe you have to go buy some of these service businesses almost as customer acquisition versus thinking about this as PE. And so what we've been doing is in each of those business departments, just go acquire these companies that are actually declining in enterprise value. You spend 1 times revenue on CAC in SaaS easily, and why not just spend one time building these service companies and then evolve them into being AI agents? So I think there are sort of new ways to build these companies to get to scale, and that is happening, and that I'm seeing get success in a lot of different industries. So I think from a perspective of starting new companies, I think it's an endless amount of stuff to do because of what I said earlier, which is every industry wants to adopt this. And there's so much opportunity in every one of these industries where the customers are looking for it that you just need to have a model of don't go in with a product that's like a sharp edge, go in with almost a forward deployed engineering mindset and treat each customer as a design win, and then go in and solve their problems using AI. Because building software is easy now versus that your mode is going to be necessarily in the initial product that you build.
So I have one more question, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. You know, for those of you on Twitter, you probably saw that Hemant went a little bit viral this past week. He was on a podcast, and he talked a little bit about, you know, the habits of high-growth companies nowadays, right? This concept of triple, triple, double, double. Talk to us about, you know,
what happened there?
Yeah.
Look, I think I just made an innocent comment that a lot of the companies we see today, before it used to be, if you go 1, 3, 9, 27, you know, 50, that's like a great SaaS company we built, we should be investing in it. I just think companies grow faster today. And they grow faster with good unit economics in large markets, again, because customers are so anxious to figure out what to do with AI. So my comment was more about that I'm telling our own team, if we're going to invest in companies, look for a new normal of how fast businesses grow. If you go back to when we were doing enterprise SaaS companies, enterprise license companies, they grew slower than enterprise SaaS companies. And we're like, wow, enterprise SaaS companies grow so fast. I just think these AI companies are growing even faster. That's all I was saying. And I think a lot of people, maybe there were SaaS company folks that didn't like what I said, but we had some good controversy around that.
And then just one last follow-up. You know, when your team is evaluating companies, I'm sure we have a lot of founders in the audience today. You know, how do you look at that growth and see whether it's sustainable growth that will endure or if it's flash in the pan kind of growth?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of businesses we see today that are thin layers on the models and are actually being adopted by customers more of a trial mode. And then there's some companies we see which are building a lot of workflow on top, but working hand in hand with enterprise customers, and their expansions look amazing as well. That's durable. I think a lot of the thin negative gross margin stuff is not going to be durable. And it's very, going back to my peak ambiguity comment, it's very hard to know where the durable value is in this next generation of companies. And if there's actually a second mover advantage. Like, remember, Google came in way after many other search engines, and is that what's going to happen here as well? So it's nerve-wracking to write the size of checks we have to write to be in these companies with enough ownership because valuations are also high. And so we just go back to the basics, which is like, where is there deep engagement with the customers that ultimately will be durable, and you'll iterate your products as technologies change, versus thin trial layers that are growing fast but have no real relationship with the customer. And there is a lot of both of that going on right now. Got it.
All right, so we'll turn it over to the audience. Hemant has promised to fund the seed round of the best question of the day. So raise your hands.
Because we're 10 minutes over, we're going to take the Q&A outside.
Great.
Okay, great.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hemant. Yeah, and the best question can still be recognized by Hemant. Thanks a lot.